Quite often we need to group a bunch of elements for styling purposes. For example, here on adobe.com, look at this navigation bar on the top. In this navigation bar, we have an image and a bunch of menu items. So this navigation bar is a container for these elements. Here's another example. This is what we call a hero unit. This hero unit has a background image, a heading, some text, and a couple links. Here are more examples. Another container, and so on. So containers are used quite a lot in web pages. Let me show you how you can work with them. So in HTML, we have a few different container elements. The one that is most commonly used is the div or division element. Now this element doesn't have any visual appearance. So if we save the changes and go back to the browser, we see nothing because this is purely a container element. So here I'm going to add a paragraph and a hyperlink. Now, let's save the changes and go back to the browser. Once again, we don't see the div. We only see the text and the hyperlink. But we can use CSS to style this div. So here in the style element, we can define a rule for our div element, but this rule will apply to all divs or all containers on this page. This is not what we want. So here we can give this div a class. Let's say product. So let's imagine here we are showcasing a product that we are selling. Now we can change this selector to div.product. Now this rule will apply to all divs with the product class. Or we can make this code shorter and more flexible by removing div. So now we have a rule that will apply to any element with the product class. So if tomorrow we decide to change this div element and replace it with another kind of container, our CSS code will still work, okay? So here I'm going to set the background color to gold. Now, take a look. See what's happening? This div, this container, is filling up the entire width of the page, even though it has very little content. Why is this happening? Well, because the div element is a block level element. Block level elements always start on a new line and fill up the entire available space. So if we duplicate this div, the new div will appear on a new line. Let me show you how to do this. So I'm going to select these few lines. Now to duplicate these lines, we hold down the Shift, Alt, and the down arrow. Okay, save the changes and take a look. So block level elements start on a new line and fill up the entire available space. But we can use CSS to change their width. So over here, we can set the width to 300 pixels. Now take a look. Here's what we get. That's better. So this is all about divs. Now we have another generic container element called the span element, which is often used for styling text. Let me show you how it works. So I'm going to delete all this code. Now let's add a paragraph with some text. Let's say we want to highlight the first word here. We can wrap this word with a div, give that div a class like highlight, and then define a CSS rule for setting the background color of highlight elements. So let's wrap this with a div. Now we give this element a class like highlight, and then define a rule here for elements with the highlight class. Here we can set the background color to yellow. Let's see what we get. See what happened? Can you explain why we're getting this weird layout? Because divs are block level elements. So we wrap this word with a div, and this div is filling up the entire width of the page. This is where we can use the span element. The span element is a generic container like a div, but it's not a block level element. It's an inline element, which means it's not going to take up the entire width of the page. So back to the code, we want to replace both these div tags with a span. Let me show you another useful shortcut. So I've selected this div. Now to select the second div, we can press Command and D on Mac or Control and D on Windows. Look, now we have multiple cursors. So we can replace both these tags in one go. We just type span and then press the escape button twice to disable multi-cursor editing. Okay, so now let's save the changes and back to the browser. Look, the first word is highlighted. So this is how we can use divs and spans. But in HTML5, we have a few more container elements that are more descriptive. We'll talk about them next.